and welcome for another little small feature of the regular Propagandacast. This time we are focusing on something else. Having looked over the different commanders, we're now going to look at some of the current, available potential commander combination, and what thoughts I figure, you might benefit from, when you put together your own army commanders, and certainly also my own thoughts in when choosing my own commanders. So I've also set up a bunch, examples of how you can do different commanders, what thoughts into it again, and hopefully give you some ideas on it, because usually you end up seeing a lot of people basically always going for one doctrine, seemingly ignoring the rest, and even then not even using the abilities properly. And again, that's, besides a bit silly, also a bit depressing. So, on to the main piece, army commanders. I've already sort of gone over them, but we'll probably go through the video again, because I'll be going through how they can sort of work in a larger picture. In this case, we're first looking at the Soviet commanders. In this case, my initial and pretty much always straight on first choice will be this, and by the way, I like to name them after historical units, because I'm that kind of nut. So of course you can always choose something there as well if you find that within your fancy. First commander here going is actually the Armoured Assault Tactics Commander. Radio Intercept actually being quite a handy ability, and it always gets you an idea of sort of what your opponent's going for. But also, the reason I have this one is more when you feel like I need to go for some armor, but not necessarily the one where you actually have to build the buildings in a sense, or just some extra armor tactics, because you get the vehicle crew repair training, always handy. You get access to T-3045s, but also to the IS-2 heavy tanks, so thus you actually have some choice. Do you need to know more numbers in terms of heavier firepower, or do you just need something singularly heavy to break through the bastard's front line? And of course, finally, you've got the Sturmwing attack, which is just, devastating towards infantry. One strafing run can, chew up an entire German grenadier squad, no matter what kind of veterancy. So in that sense, it's, also a nasty ability. In that way, it sets up for some nasty armored tactics. Second ability I've got is actually conscript support tax. I know a lot of people, like rifles, guard combination, or combined arms, and sure, that's nice, but I prefer one that really goes into it, with the conscripts, with the repair kits, which I also think is, quite a handy ability, but again, underutilized, and rapid conscription, which again, gives you some substance, something to back up with. And in this case, this is one I more go for, when I'm feeling, offensive with my infantry, but at the same time, it can still be used to support vehicles quite nicely with the conscript repair kit, meaning your armor won't have much of a downtime. A bit like the vehicle crew repair training. These are sort of focusing also on keeping your armor in a better shape, and also quickly getting them back into the fight, which I actually find is quite vital with the Soviets. Again, it's also quite vital with all armies, but it's something the Soviets really can work to minimize the downtime on. The Germans don't have those abilities. They need to then just train a lot of pioneers, whereas again, depending on what you go on, you don't really need a lot of combat engineers to do the job. Finally, we have mechanized support tactics, all a bunch of nice abilities: guards rifle, infantry, marked vehicle, anti-tank and ambush tactics, the ISU-152, I really love that thing, you can get it out, and a precision bombing strike. And that's sort of more of the in-between, I'm not entirely sure what the situation is. I'm going for something, more broadly placed. They can do a bit of this, with infantry, but also become quite handy against vehicles as well with the marked vehicle. Combine that, for example, with an ISU-152, and you're probably going to give the German commander some very, very, very bad dreams. Of course, that's my first commander combination. Again, I always, have these sort of ideas, should there be a sort of, focus for sort of different situations. That's more my thinking, but also more importantly, abilities I might actually end up using. It also comes down to a bit of psychology, and I tend to find, these abilities tend to be more something I work towards. Moving on here, we have this one, which is actually quite similar, only slight difference is anti-infantry tactics. This is more for now feeling a bit more experimental, although I suppose could easily shift this one up, for example, with the guards motor coordination tactics, just to suggest, just to throw things up a bit. Perhaps make it a bit more infantry oriented, but anti-infantry tactics, really focused on removing the other guy's infantry, not so much boosting your own, although of course you've still got the shock troopers. Also a bit something to keep in mind. It's also perhaps a bit more work towards, for example, if I suddenly decide to play some 2 versus 2 games, it's more of a support doctrine, it's more something I can use to support another plan. Of course, that's also something you need to keep in consideration. Some army commander combinations perhaps work a bit more towards 1 versus 1, whereas with 2 versus 2s, you might work something towards, works better. And of course, if you're playing with someone regularly, you might want to work out something, so you work out each other's strengths and weaknesses and cover those through the commanders. Then of course we've got the next one up here, and this is more one I've just thrown together theoretically. This is more, a bit of a fun one, trying to throw in some new commanders, but also in a way that, makes sense. This one more just focused on infantry, and more specifically also messing up the other guys' infantry. You've got the NKVD rifle disruption tactics, with radio intercept, recon overflight, rapid conscription, fear propaganda, and of course the Sturmweg. This is more, the rifle disruption really lives up to the name. It's more about messing up the other guys' infantry, and of course keeping a slight idea of what's going on. Conscript support again, therefore just throwing up your own infantry into the fight. And terror, again, it's actually been receiving some changes, more about, again, causing a bit of a mess. I suppose this is more, you'll cause a bit of a mess. Doctrine commander combination for army opponent. And of course also vital to remember, these are all suggestions. After the first two, this is more suggestions, just ideas to sort of give you an idea of what you can go for, not necessarily what you should go for. One could easily throw them together in all sorts of fun and wacky combinations. And again, the important part is to actually say, when you look throughout this, you've got, I will actually use this, this, and this, there, and there, and then. Trying to think about how you will use the abilities in advance is actually going to be a huge advantage, because then once you've thought about them, when it actually happens, you might actually go, oh right, that time when I was putting them together, I actually thought about this, so now I'll be using this ability here. Thinking about things actually, for some bizarre reason, leads to you improving. Who would have thought? Popping over here, Third Shock Army, as I like to call it. This is just really infantry. We get the conscript support tactics, the guard rifle combined arms tactics, and the NKVD rifle disruption tactics. This is just, the most infantry focused doctrines I could actually find, although you could substitute the NKVD rifle disruption tactics with this. You still have something going forward with shock troops, armored vehicle detection, and conscript repair kits. They're all infantry focused abilities, and working with infantry, although again, also a bit working towards armor. And of course then you might wonder, well, why would I want guards rifle combined arms tactics and conscript support? To which I would say, it all depends on the situation. Sometimes, just conscripts might be the better focus, but on the other hand, guard rifle combined arms tactics, while also infantry focused, does have a bit more of a broader sense to it with the guards rifle infantry and the howitzer. So there's a bit more of a broad sense, whereas conscript support tactics is more of a sharpened edge towards a very specific type of play. Though again, they can, encompass others. This one is more, how shall we say, supportive, less, direct. And again, there might be, situations where one calls for the other. So, and again, just suggestions. If you ultimately think, well, this is rubbish, Dane, I'm not holding you at gunpoint, forcing you to make these decisions. I'm just trying to give ideas, perhaps enlighten a bit. And again, get people to make some slightly more interesting combinations, rather than, for example, as the Soviets, you always pretty much see this one, and then they always pretty much end up going for this without trying something else, because they're just stuck in a rut, or afraid of, trying up something new. And you shouldn't be afraid to. Just try to figure out what works for you. That's important, because ultimately I end up seeing a lot of people where it doesn't really work out, and they just go for, because everybody else goes for it, I should as well. And then they only basically end up using one or two abilities, whereas if they'd chosen another one where, the cool guys don't go for this doctrine, but somehow I end up using all the abilities, but I won't go for it anyways. Don't. And then moving on to the last one, so more of an attempt at heavily armored focus. We get armored assault tactics, which is really the armored focused one. Or we also have guard motors combination tactics. Again, a bit more of a mix between armor and infantry. A bit slow in approach, but still got that nice armored punch. And then finally, mechanized support tactics. ISU-152 bombing strikes, marked vehicle, guards rifle infantry. Again, they can be worked towards vehicle support. Some armored thrusts as well. Although, of course, you could, for example, substitute with a bit shock rifle frontline tactics. Shock motor heavy tactics can also sort of work into that. Again, it's all depending on the purview of how you sort of interpret things. It's all about context also. So there you got it. I mean, again, these are just 5 examples I've put together. Well, 3 of them. The rest are sort of, armies, commanders I actually use regularly. And of course, more tuned into how I play the game, how I perceive the situation, and how I might actually react. Again, you might end up, with something, if you actually think about it, where you got something completely different. You might actually realize, terror tactics actually work pretty well. NKVD rifle disruption tactics also work well for some other reason for me. Again, there's no one specific rule to how you're supposed to play the game. If you can get any of these commanders to work for you, for example, go for it. But, just try out something different. Try out something, always, when you go through this, wonder, will you actually be using any of these abilities? And if you can actually say no to more than, say, half of them, you might want to consider getting something else. And if you can't, of course, get it with any of them, perhaps you might just want to work on just getting better. Moving on to the Germans. Deutschland. This is more my usual combination for when I play as the Germans. You've got Festung armor for when I'm feeling on the defense, and things are not, I'm not entirely sure on this, I'll pull back on the defensive. Or, for example, if I've actually really done well early on, I go for Festung support, Festung armor, and then proceed to dig in, prepare some specific areas, and hold on. That's where I go for this. Lightning 1, on the other hand, when I'm feeling, really offensive, I need to get back in the fight. I also want to, focus on infantry, but with some armor support in the form of the Tiger tank. I also know, of course, this will require a lot of munitions, so of course, already there, some clear points become clear for me. But again, it's the one where, I really go all in with infantry, relief infantry, tactical movement, Jaeger light infantry, just get nasty. And then assault support doctrine is again the sort of, more, I'm not entirely sure of how this situation is going. I will choose something a bit more broad, a bit more stable. Assault support with cargo trucks in case resources are not looking too good for me. Artillery field officer to buff infantry, but in more localized fashion. Strafing runs, Tiger tanks, and fragmentation bombs. All there, something to have you give you a go with. Looking onwards, on the other hand, we have the 18th Panzergrenadier Division. Perhaps a bit more, again, different things, but also perhaps more working towards with friends, I know. Again, I might choose something that works a bit more supportive. Joint operations, offering plenty of that. Essentially, working quite nicely with that. And of course, you've got Jaeger infantry on the other hand, if you really want to go, hardcore into the infantry, with ambush camouflage, Jaeger light infantry, tactical movement, light artillery barrages. Again, this is more the infantry approach for me, but, less armored support like Lightning War. And then, of course, Spearhead Doctrine. This is more, again, where I get into armor. Of course, joint operations can also be used more defensively if necessary. But Spearhead, offensive, armored, fast. Panzer Tactician, mortar half-tech, which again allows you to swiftly move on without having to worry about repacking a mortar. Reconnaissance overflight, to get an idea where the opponent is positioned. Tiger tanks, fragmentation bombs, again, very offensive, very armored. Then, of course, we move on to something where I actually sort of put together, an armored doctrine. What would that look like? But again, I also tried to keep things in the overall picture again. Something for things that require a bit more of a defensive approach. Something for a more aggressive, but also something for a bit more of a measured. Fortified armor being the more measured, defensive to be honest. You've got Hull Down, you've got Panzer Tactician, you've got the command tank, you've got the Elephant tank destroyer, reconnaissance overflight. It can work nicely defensively, but it can also be used offensively. You know what you're doing, but it's definitely got those defensive traits. Spearhead Doctrine again, offense. Jaeger armor, not a huge fan of it again, but sometimes you just have to try it out. In this case, it might actually work out well as a sort of more go-between. Anti-tank mines like the Riegel, reconnaissance overflight, spotting scopes. It's got those defensive elements, but again, spotting scopes can also be used aggressively. Same with the reconnaissance overflight, Elephant tank strike, and of course the Stuka bombing strike. Really something for you when you get the move on and need to blast those bastards out of their holes. Looking on here at the 255th Infantry Division. Whoops, need to fix that one up. Hi. And again, that's pretty much the most infantry-oriented doctrines at the moment for the Germans. Lightning War, Jaeger infantry, and actually Storm Doctrine. Ambush camouflage, tactical movement, artillery. I mean, it's really the best you can get. A lot of the German doctrines are more focused on abilities or sort of vehicles, while the concepts that's not so much really about infantry besides these two. But still, Storm Doctrine actually might have something going for it. Again, all depends on situation. This more about support. And again, you know, a bit more perhaps if you are unclear on things. You have ambush camouflage, anti-tank mines, tactical movement, again if you need to swiftly react, artillery, and the Stuka bombing strike. Although, of course, you also have to keep in mind, you know, keep some munitions on hand. Keep some munitions on hand. Final sort of potential army combination is more of, you know, thought, you know, I just want to play defensive, Dane. What could you suggest? I mean, then we get Speerverband Ritter, Festung Armor, Joint Operations, Festung Support Doctrines, the more defensively oriented, but they can still, you know, offer some offense. Festung Armor in particular with Panzertischen, Command Tanks, Railway Artillery. Joint Operations also offers something with the artillery and the artillery field officer, but you know, also the defensive aspects of it, if you know to use it correctly. And Festung Support obviously also can work out that quite nicely. In particular, sector artillery is very much in the defensive scene of things. And again, you might say, no, Dane, but isn't there any other combination? Of course there is. Plenty of them. I mean, you could throw something together like this. I mean, if you can get it to work for you, do it. I'm not saying there is one correct combination. Ultimately, the thing that comes down to is you going through each of the commanders and their abilities and going, can I actually use this in my play style? Will I actually be using most of the abilities? If the answer is no, you know, look for something else. Or again, if it's everything you say no to, you might just need to improve just a wee bit. But again, this is just, you know, some thoughts on it. Nothing dogmatic. Nothing, you know, specifically requires, you know, to swear eternal allegiance. Any kind of that stuff. Again, it's just sort of to give you some inspiration, some ideas on how you can actually run things. And again, you know, some of the more basic, you know, groundwork in the mind when putting together these things. What is it that I actually want to achieve when putting together? What kind of situation do I want to prepare for with each commander? Is it a defensive? Is it an offensive? Is it more specifically towards infantry or vehicle play? Is it more of how I'm feeling about a situation? I mean, even that could be valid. You know, am I feeling nervous? Then I want to go for this one. Am I feeling aggressive? Then this one. Is it more about, you know, flaws you want to cover up? Then again, you might say, no, I'm actually having a lot of trouble keeping my infantry alive, Dane. You know, then again, you know, you might want something, you know, that works around, you know, relief infantry, for example. Lightning War, Festung Support, you know, one more aggressive, one more defensive. And of course, there's not going to be a third one, at least not yet, but then you might say, you know, I might want to go for this, or something entirely different. And that's alright. I mean, ultimately, again, the question that comes down to when you put it together is, you know, what sort of situation will I use the abilities in? Will I actually use them? Will I feasibly be able to say, hey, I could actually use them? I mean, that's ultimately has to be the guiding principle. I mean, if you'll find if any of these things actually look interesting to you, go for it. If you actually have any success with them, great, bloody well great. If you don't, alright, again, most of them are examples, and some of them are just, you know, again, things that actually work for me. What works for me might not necessarily work for you. Just a bit of a warning there. But again, you know, just try and figure out what is own. And of course, you already have some great combinations that work for you and army commanders. Feel free to post them in the comments, you know. Give other people some ideas, just, you know, what works for you if actually something different. And of course, I also imagine I'll be making more videos like this, you know, once more commanders are added to the game. Currently, of course, it's a bit light on that. So, there you go. Hope you enjoyed this video. Hope it gave you some ideas. Hope it inspired you. Again, you know, feel free, you know, to post in the comments. Give me some feedback. Share it with friends. This is Imperial Dane saying cheers.